Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair for coming. Inshallah, we'll have our session started now with Sheikh Akram. The Fajr khaterah or Fajr topic today is ethics of ikhtilaf, or adab al-ikhtilaf in Islam, or ethics of dispute in Islam, mainly Islamic fiqh. Reminder also that at Dhuhr, please come and join us. Well, that's for youth mainly. After Dhuhr, inshallah, youth event. Of course, you're welcome, inshallah. inshallah. Alhamdulillah. Sheikh Akram, inshallah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. So with this topic, adab al-ikhtilaf, one thing that I have found to be a problem is the misunderstanding of where our ikhtilaf even comes from. So we're asked to So there's a disconnect of how even ikhtilaf happens, how even opinions even come to be in the first place. So we're asked to have, adab al-ikhtilaf, to have, manners when it comes to difference of opinion and accept differences of opinion, but then we don't spend the time to talk about how these differences of opinion occur. So you're expecting someone to, tolerate something that they don't even understand in the first place, which is a very difficult thing to do, right? It's a very difficult thing to do. So the approach I'm going to take today might be a little bit different. So we're not going to, necessarily speak so much about the adab al-ikhtilaf. It's going to come at the end. But most of today is actually going to be about how ikhtilaf even occurs, so that we appreciate ikhtilaf in the first place. And I'm going to introduce how the basis of the Islamic sciences, the usul, serve not only as a source of academic regulation for scholars, but also as a gateway, as a map for everyday Muslim to understand the fabric of Islamic thought. And so when someone becomes familiar with usul, it offers a person a grounding to understand the big picture, right? To appreciate the Islamic worldview and how it's cohesive, it's interconnected, it's vast. And so that's one of the most important reasons of why usul even exists, right? And this is one important reason also why the usul may be more critical to our pursuits today than at any point in human history, given the unprecedented amount of information and pace of change experienced in our modern world. So let's talk about what is usul, because that's how we ground ourselves, our Muslim. That's how we dictate how we think in the Islamic sciences. So usul, at the outset of discourse on a topic, scholars in the Islamic sciences often begin by defining terms. So this helps establish a common terminology so that everybody is on the same page when we're having a discussion. So two complementary views on the usage of a term are commonly described. One is the lexical term, right? So lughatan, and so linguistic. And then there is the istilahi term, which is the, what you might say, the technical term. And this is, whether it's classical poetry, prose, tafsir, fiqh, usul al-fiqh, hadith, etc. Each one is going to have a lexical definition and a technical definition. And now in following generations, dictionaries were compiled from these sources to record this type of knowledge, this type of definitions. And it's because one term can be used for more than one meaning, based on the usage of its context. So you have to understand and come to an agreement of what you are meaning behind the term before a discussion takes place. So for example, consider in the English language how the term surf. If I say surf, what comes to mind? Anybody? Surf the web. What else comes to mind? Surf the ocean, right? So which one am I talking about? You will never know, right? Unless I tell you, right? Unless I tell you what am I talking about. So without defining it, without contextualizing it, we're not going to know if somebody means surfing the web or surfing the ocean. And then the second the dimension is that technical definition, right? The term's usage by the scholars of a particular field of that Islamic science. The technical definition of a term is usually linked with the lexical meaning as a related concept and applies a new usage with the Islamic sciences. So the usul are a good example of these two views of terminology. The lexical definition of the term usul is base, essential, fundamental, asl, right? The foundation of something. So usul in the Arabic term, right, is a plural for the singular asl, and meaning one basis or foundation. That's the technical definition. But the technical definition, when used within the Islamic sciences, includes the rules and methodology that govern a particular discipline as practiced by its scholars. So put differently, the term usul is linked to a particular discipline that it is describing. For example, usul al-fiqh means the foundations of Islamic jurisprudence. Usul al-tafsir means the foundations of Quranic interpretation. And so when it's used in this way, usul X, usul Y, usul Z, then it means the rules and methodology followed by the practitioner of that discipline, right? And the process of regulation as well for that practitioner on that helps them govern the manner of research and reasoning within that discipline. Now, historically speaking, scholars have classified usul as an entirely separate science in their own right because of its breadth and its importance. And others considered them to be sub-disciplines or a part of the associated research science. So for example, some scholars would put usul al-fiqh under fiqh. Other scholars would split the two and say they are completely different sciences, right? Because there's so much breadth and depth in usul al-fiqh on its own, it should be treated as a separate science on its own. So let's explore some examples, right, of usul sciences in the Islamic tradition. So first we have, for example, usul al-tafsir. Right? This is the methodology of Quranic interpretation. It guides how the Quran is engaged, or how interpretations are arrived at, and all the overall rules and methodology that will govern the research and scholarly opinion in this discipline. And then another example is usul al-hadith, which is sometimes called mustalah al-hadith. Right? It's also referred to as mustalah hadith. So if you ever hear somebody say usul al-hadith and then you hear somebody else say mustalah al-hadith, it's the exact same science, just referred to differently. And this is the methodology of hadith source, criticism, and evaluation. So a hadith is what? Right? A hadith is a report attributed to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, right? Regarding his statements, regarding behaviors, description, or maybe even silent approval, right? So how do we evaluate the source of that claim? It's something called a sanad, a chain of narrations. And so the honesty and memory and details of every member of the chain of narration is how a specialist in the field will arrive at whether this narration, this hadith that has reached us today, is likelihood of being authentic, or the likelihood of it being sahih, or the likelihood of it being da'if, maybe it's, which is weak, maybe it is hasan, then so it's good, there might be a little bit of flaw in it, but it's not quite that we can't take from it, or maybe it's mawdu', it's fabricated, etc., right? Now one thing to keep in mind that's commonly misunderstood, because oftentimes people are like, oh, this hadith is da'if, right? Even if the hadith is da'if, right, we're not going to use it for like the foundations of the deen, but it can be used as supporting evidence, right? It won't be used as the evidence, right? I might make it clear, it won't be used as the evidence, but it can be used as supporting evidence. Why? Because the hadith scholars were very strict. They were very, very strict. You messed up one time in salah, they rake you down as a narrator. Like, khalas, all of us in this room would be fabricated narrators. Like, it's over. They're very strict, and it's good that they were strict because it preserved our tradition at a very high level, right? So one of my teachers said that even one da'if hadith is more authentic than the entire biblical literature, right? So like, take it easy. If you hear someone narrate a da'if hadith to support what they're talking about or to support what they're claiming, no problem, right? As long as it's not the whole basis of what they are claiming, right? It can be used in that sense. And it also can be used for fada'il. There are some, things where, you recite this dhikr a certain amount of times and this is the reward, right? Or you recite this surah, during this time, then you get this reward. What's the harm in practicing that, For example, the hadith of reciting Surah Al-Waqi'ah after Maghrib, right? Or in the evening, okay? It's a da'if narration, it's da'if, right? Now if somebody does it, practices on it, are we going to condemn them for reciting Surah Al-Waqi'ah? Like, let's be critical here, right? Let's be smart. So, we can do that as well, but as long as we're not, again, using it as the base of our evidence. Rather, we want to leave that to the sahih narrations, inshallah ta'ala. So all of these matters are associated with something called usul al-hadith. Now, a third important example, and what's basically going to be the bulk of the discussion today, is usul al-fiqh. Usul al-fiqh, right? This is the methodology of Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh, Islamic legal theory. And it encompasses not just the rulings themselves, but how the rulings are arrived at, right? How the rulings are arrived at. And so there's a helpful analogy, okay? I'm a sports guy, okay? So I'm going to make a sports analogy, and inshallah ta'ala, this is how we're going to do it, right? And if you consider this carefully, it has profound implications, inshallah. So an understanding of this analogy can help us appreciate how the respective usul complements the rest of the Islamic sciences, right? So imagine a competitive sport, let's say soccer, okay, or football. In this game, there are athletes that are participating, and ultimately the winner is decided by the score, even if many other statistics are tracked, right? So how many goals Cristiano Ronaldo scores does not matter if he loses, right? He still loses. In this analogy, we consider the athletes as the practitioners of the scholarly discipline. Okay? The soccer players on the field are the fuqaha. Okay? They are the ones that are practicing the fiqh. Right? And obviously no analogy is intended comprehensively. I'm not comparing soccer players to our scholars of our deen. Right? This is just an example. Now, the athletes who are trying to score a goal are the specialists of fiqh who are seeking to offer a valid contribution that adds a new opinion, a helpful perspective, or a helpful analysis to the field. So the players are the jurists, the fuqaha, right? Now the practitioners and specialists of fiqh. Now who is the usuli in this example? Who do you think the usuli would be? The referee, beautiful, mashallah, right? The usuli is the referee. He's not concerned with scoring. He's not trying to get the ball into the net. But what he is concerned is that the people that are trying to get the ball into the net are following the rules of the game. So in soccer, for example, you can't grab the ball and score with your hand, right? This is not a legitimate way to score. It violates the rules of the game. In basketball, you can't just run around without dribbling. It doesn't matter if the ball goes through the hoop, you broke the rule, right? And so that play would be considered not legitimate, right? Now with that, in our Islamic disciplines, rules help govern what makes an appropriate contribution and the parameters for how to think, okay? Now this protects these disciplines from otherwise becoming prone to anyone's whims, their desires, baseless opinions that are introduced in the name of the religion, right? So someone says like, oh, in my opinion, I think, right? It's like, pause right there. Where did you even get that from? You have to lay out your usul, right? So you have to be very careful about these things. I mean, obviously when it's talking about the deen, but if you're talking about like coffee, for example, go ahead, like have all the opinions that you want, right? If you have usul behind your coffee opinions, that's great as well, right? Then we can trust you more. But ideally, it helps that a body of scholarship self-governs while being open to criticism and evaluation in a scholarly way. So scholars have developed this field of usul al-fiqh, but it's also not authoritative in the sense that one person's methodology is the authority for the entire religion. And this is important because if it were, we would fall into the trap of religions before us and essentially followed man instead of Allah, right? Followed man instead of Allah. And then I'll even talk about why it's even important for us to follow scholarship and that this is actually from the Quran and Sunnah, that Allah and His Messenger tell us to follow scholarship, right? So in and of itself, scholarship is a protected, sacred thing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He told us that to follow those who are learned. And so there is a balance between academic freedom and introducing new thought while still being consistent in methodology of thinking within the scholarly field, right? And so without this methodology, Islam becomes anything to anyone. Any whim, any thought, any opinion can be associated with the religion without process of scholarly exchange, and a person can make any claim and make it authoritative and say that the Quran says this because I feel this way. Or the hadith literature says this because I feel a certain way, right? So that's why usul are so important. Because when Islam becomes anything to anyone, then it becomes nothing at all. And, have you ever seen, who's seen The Incredibles here? Right, you've seen The Incredibles, right? If everyone's super, nobody is, right? So that's the same thing, right? So the usul regulate the methodology of research and scholarship so that these bodies of Islamic sciences can be well governed, right? Now, common question you'll hear with these Islamic sciences is what? Was this practiced at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Are these sciences in general an innovation, right? The answer to all of the usul disciplines is, yes, right? As long as there were rulings and scholarly opinions being offered, there were necessary rules and methodologies regulating how those rulings came about. So let's examine an example in the field of fiqh or Islamic law jurisprudence. At the time of the Prophet Muhammad, during his life and in his presence, there was no need for anyone to offer a scholarly ruling because the Prophet did not speak based on whims. Right? He only spoke based on revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. Right? He does not speak from his own inclination, right? But it is a revelation that is revealed. However, the companions, they did make Islamic legal rulings during his lifetime for one of two reasons. Either the companion would be physically outside of the Prophet ﷺ's presence, such as on travel or in a different part of the city, and a situation would arise and they had to make a ruling, right? Or the Prophet ﷺ would give them permission in his presence to offer their opinion on the matter. Okay? The verses of the hijab, the barrier, right, of the wives of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who was that actually encouraged by? Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. He's the one who recommended that. And then it was revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? There's another incident where there was, a group of companions that came across a tribe, and the leader of that tribe was acting very mean towards them and very nasty towards them. And essentially they found out that leader of the tribe needed some ruqyah to be done, right? And one of the companions stepped up and recited Surah Al-Fatiha as ruqyah, and it helped heal this leader, right? And then they took payment from the ruqyah, right? They took payment from the ruqyah. They didn't know if that was permissible or not, but they made an ijtihad in that moment and they took the payment. And so they went to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and they asked, right, was this okay, right? And the Prophet ﷺ said, who told you that Surah Fatiha is one of the best surahs to recite for ruqyah? Like, who had told you that? Like, the Prophet ﷺ didn't tell them that, but they made an ijtihad in that moment, right? And then he said, give me a share of the wealth that you guys took for the ruqyah. Now, why did he say that, right? It's not because he's greedy and he wants money, right? but it's because he wanted to show to everybody that it is permissible to take money for that service, right? It is permissible, right? So this is the life of the Prophet ﷺ. He has to make sure that everything is clearly permissible and clearly haram. So this is why he acted in that way, right? And to make that clear. So these are just some very, very brief examples, right? Very brief examples. And so when those rulings would be presented to the Prophet ﷺ, he would either approve of the ruling, in which case it would then become part of the sunnah, and therefore part of the primary sources of our religion. Or he would disapprove of it and correct it, and in that case, that would also become part of his sunnah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So in that way, the prophetic methodology, through primary source texts and through rulings of companions, the science of usul al-fiqh, was, practiced by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that way, right? Now it looks different for us because we don't have an authoritative figure, right? So the scholarly body may be authoritative, but an individual is not going to be authoritative. So it will look different, right? Now the codification of these disciplines, or writings of the books of these disciplines, that did come after the generation of the companions, right? This is not true just of Islamic disciplines, but is generally true of the fields of any human research and scholarship, right? That writing down the rules of a field in books is not a prerequisite to the existence of that field. It's part of the growth and maturity of that field, right? It's part of the growth and the maturity of that field. So for example, in Arabic grammar and language, the Arabs during the time of the Prophet ﷺ didn't learn Arabic like we do. From reading books and classes and taking classes, they were already masters of the Arabic language, right? They were able to gather in the city square and recite novel lines, advanced poetry, and everything. Does anybody know where our Nahu and Sarf rules even come from? What is the source text of our Nahu and Sarf rules? The Quran, right? So before the Quran, we still had masters of the Arabic language, but they weren't learning Nahu and Sarf as kids before the Quran, right? That's not what it was. So the language was learned as a living language through observation, through kind of like osmosis, right? And the proficiency was unmatched by the overwhelming majority of the people that are alive today, right? But they did not ever read a book on Arabic grammar, and they knew better Arabic than we do. Or they never sat in Arabic language class, and they knew better Arabic than we do. Similarly, the usul were part of that consciousness. But the fields were not codified and written down until later generations. And as Islam spread to other lands, it started to become increasingly important to record and standardize discourse on these disciplines, right? And there were many reasons for this. One reason is because Islam spread to more Arab and non-Arab lands, and with that naturally came the weakening of the Arabic language for both native speakers and for new Muslims coming into the religion who were not native speakers. So it became very important to standardize and facilitate learning the language, because later generations did not have the same level of lexical meanings present in the Quran or in the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Which is important because I might hurt some feelings here. That's okay. We spent a lot of time this weekend. We're friends now, right? Alhamdulillah. But if you don't know what a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ means in Arabic without looking up a translation, then you have no authority in commentating on that hadith, or putting your opinion on that hadith at least, right? You can commentate from what other scholars have said, but putting your opinion onto the hadith, right? You can't, because it requires, unless you have the same level of understanding of the language of what the Prophet ﷺ actually spoke, you can't commentate on a translation. You can't interpret a translation, because a translation is already an interpretation. You can't interpret an interpretation. You're not interpreting the Prophet ﷺ's words anymore, right? So, I hate to break it to you, right? If you memorize some hadith in English, it doesn't make you a muhaddith, okay? Now similarly, as more people came into the religion, there also became new situations, new cultures, new behaviors that arose when the Prophet ﷺ was never present, right? Or things that weren't practiced by the companions. So now, you needed to have rules and regulations of usul it became more and more important. There needed to be a system. So Ibn Khaldun, radiallahu an, rahimahullah, the famous historian, considered by many of people to be the father of sociology, right? The father of sociology. He wrote this masterpiece called Al-Muqaddimah, right? And this is a masterful text, right? It's got a lot of great sociological aspects to this text of just how the world works and how cultures work. It's beautiful. And he mentions that as these factors became more prominent in these enterprises, for example like fiqh, these enterprises became crafts of their own. So the jurists of later generations came to need these rules and methodology in order to arrive at their rulings. And it was then the various disciplines started to glean and extract these timeless principles of the various usul from the original sources, right? So, the foundations of the Islamic religion, there is one usul science that is notable exception in its usage of terminology. It uses the term usul in its lexical meaning, literally means foundation, rather than the technical meaning that we discussed earlier. That science is a field called usul ad-din, right? The foundations of the Islamic religion. This discipline has been defined as a science that enables a person to prove religious beliefs by stating appropriate evidence and by warding off misconceptions, right? And so there are important components of this discipline of usul ad-din, such as basic knowledge of the shahada, the testimony of the faith of Islam, ibadat, the acts of worship. And there's also a component of this definition where the practical manifestation of it shifts with time, a part related to proving religious beliefs and warding off misconceptions and to avoid doubts, shubuhat, and navigate turbulent waters. So usul ad-din in context is going to change as well based on time and place. What is one thing that we are currently trying to figure out the usul ad-din for that maybe the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ or the companions never interacted with? What's one thing? It's very obvious. We talked about it yesterday. Right? LGBTQ, right? And so scholarly bodies are talking about it, and so what's the framework that they're using to talk about it? What is the usul that they're using to talk about it? Are they just making things up, just sitting here and ranting about how they don't like it all day? No, like there's framework here, and that's what usul ad-din is. And so usul ad-din essentially, in a very, very simplified manner, right? Because obviously this is just a short 45-minute, 1-hour lecture. I'm not going to be able to cover all sciences and the advanced levels of those sciences. But usul ad-din essentially is how do you apply the deen? How to apply the deen, right? And this is studied in madrasas. This is studied in Islamic universities in order to help apply the deen. This is actually why, all bias aside, because I did study locally, right? Locally, I mean in America. Why I think it's extremely important for people if they want to, endeavor on studies of the Islamic sciences, their foundation should at least be local. Because the shuyukh and the scholars that they study from locally have a good grasp of the usul ad-din of the area, of the locale, right? Now, anybody that comes from I'm not saying that there's anything bad with going overseas, it's great. But anybody that comes from overseas and comes back, they'll be the first to tell you that there's a transition period, a learning curve that happens. Because the usul ad-din that they learned in whatever country that they were in, Malaysia, Egypt, Medina, wherever it may be, the shuyukh were teaching them the usul ad-din of that locale, which doesn't always translate to the community that they're going to go back and serve at home. So the advanced postgraduate takhassus stuff, do all that overseas. Alhamdulillah, explore as much as you can. Go to Syria, go to Egypt, go to Iraq, go to Baghdad, go to Africa, go to Mauritania, go everywhere. But the foundations of your deen, locally is good because it helps you with that usul ad-din, how to apply the deen in your society. So let's examine some concrete examples of this, okay? An average person in our lifetime has the potential to be exposed to more information in a single day than a person may have encountered in an entire year a few centuries ago. Okay? I'm going to say that again. An average person in our time can be exposed to more information in one day than somebody a few centuries ago can be exposed to in an entire year. Right? Between social media, TV, globalized information exchange, other sources. So there's many people that have experienced this information overload. Now, as a consequence of this, okay, one of the good things about this is we have so much information, so we have so much to learn. People can have a lot to learn and a lot to benefit. But one of the consequences of this is that a 21st century Muslim is a globalized, interconnected world that may need to know more about the foundations of the religion than a 17th century farmer who knew and was comfortable with just the essentials of Islam, and he was exposed to far less information, so he was all good, right? On the other hand, a graduate student, particularly if they're going into the liberal arts, may be in a much greater need of rationale behind sociological or legal rulings in Islam than an average Muslim. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is like if, someone who is taught to critically think, someone who is, exposed to philosophy and things like that, right? They're going to have to personally themselves engage with the deen in a deeper manner until they get rid of those shubahat and they get rid of those doubts. Okay? But the 17th century farmer said, قال Allah, قال Rasul, سمعنا وأطعنا. I'm good. Right? And so we look at them as like people that are very simple, but in my head, in my mind, when I look at them, that's the most intelligent person there is. If you can get to the point where Allah said it, His Messenger said it, that's done, that's it. That's like the most intelligent, high spirituality that we can get. Because that's essentially all it is. That Allah and His Messenger are the two that know best. They know everything. Allah knows everything. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ wants what's best for us, and He is our guide. And so whatever they say, I will take 100%. Right? Now, knowing these rulings will not inherently make someone like a better person, for example, right? It will not make someone more ethical in business decisions or more moral, but it will teach them what is ethical business, what is morality, and then it's their obligation to practice it. But that knowledge needs to be there. Now, another example is a Muslim living as a minority in the West, right? There are certain rare circumstances or historical details that outside of these circumstances, nobody but a specialist would need to know, right? Yet they are frequent targets of Islamophobic discourse. So examples are historical legal regulations on social constructs that no longer exist in society because of decisions on peace and war in pre-modern societies, right? What am I referencing here? I'm referencing slavery. Okay? So, in our legal tradition, this idea of slavery, it exists, but it looks drastically different than American slavery. And so when we hear that, obviously our hearts and our minds go like, oh, right? But then when you look at the Islamic discourse, you see in the fiqh, you see what? Like feed them from the same food, clothe them from the same clothes. A servant and a master would be walking down the road, nobody knows who is who, right? There was a certain level of caretaking that was ascribed, right? Now we can go to the whole, there's the whole human rights thing that we talked about yesterday, and is it right that one person owns another person? But the reason why I'm mentioning this is because most people wouldn't need to delve into this stuff, but in an Islamophobic, I hate to use the term Islamophobic, honestly, I'm not even going to use that term, but in a world where people are trying to pick apart everything about Islam, they're going to try to find those nitty-gritty details and so-called expose them to the world, right? When the reality is, the first group of people to abolish slavery was who? It was the Muslims. Which empire? Anybody know? Ertugrul, Uthman, right? The Ottoman Empire. They were the first people to abolish slavery. And then Western countries followed suit. And so actually the scholars of today, the majority of scholars today, say it would actually be makruh, or it's not allowed to bring it back. Right? It's not allowed to be the Muslims are not allowed to be the people that bring it back, right? Like that's not something that we have. So it becomes important for Muslims to have basic knowledge of this stuff, so you can ward off the misconceptions. Yes, correct. You're correct, right?
The rule you invoke for a certain situation, and you're setting a situation, at least in my mind, doesn't translate to a change of basis of rules or laws of Islam. At least that's how I understood it. So please clarify.
So I'm gonna get to more of that, inshallah. So let's actually hold that question up to the end. If you still have that question, then we can discuss it more, inshallah. Right? Okay. Now let's talk about something called ijtihad, reasoning, evidence, etc. Okay? So we begin with a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in which he spoke to Mu'adh bin Jabal, who was a noble companion that he sent as an emissary to Yemen. And in the absence of the Prophet ﷺ, Mu'adh would have to judge among people and issue rulings. And so this hadith, it gives us both the permission and the basic methodology of issuing Islamic legal rulings for people that are qualified. Al-Harith ibn Amr reported that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, or sent Mu'adh to Yemen, and he said, "How will you judge?" And Mu'adh said, "I will judge according to the book of Allah." And the Prophet ﷺ told him, "What if it is not in the book of Allah?" And Mu'adh ibn Jabal said, "Then with the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam." And then the Prophet ﷺ said, "What if it's not in the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam?" And then Mu'adh said, "Then I strive to form an opinion," right? AKA perform ijtihad. Perform ijtihad. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, "All praise is due to Allah, who has made suitable the Messenger of Allah," right? And so this ijtihad, or scholarly effort of judgment, is part what makes the religion suitable for different times, for different places and contexts. And the Quran contains broad, overarching values that are timeless and are not restricted to a particular nation, gender, ethnicity, or time, right? So the Prophet ﷺ taught us that his community or ummah will not come to a consensus upon misguidance. We know this from the hadith as well. Prophet ﷺ said that they will never come to a consensus on misguidance. So if there is something that all the scholars of the ummah agree on, the Prophet ﷺ has said that this cannot be an error. Okay? So again, one example we talked about yesterday is the impermissibility of homosexual acts. Right? There's ijma' on this. There's no difference of opinion on this. So, it is authoritative because there is ijma'. Now, it is not, the scholars of the Islamic tradition have outlined also the foundations of what it takes to be a mujtahid, a practitioner and a master of Islamic law, right? So, for example, one such formulation outlines that there has to be 8 areas a person must master in order to be a mujtahid. First of all, you have to master the Quran and its sciences, right? So the Quran, be hafiz of the Quran, and then the ulum al-Quran, right? The qira'at, the usul al-tafsir, etc. You have to also master the sunnah, the hadith literature. You also have to master the Arabic language. You have to master the areas of ijma', scholarly consensus, and know exactly what issues have ijma' and what issues don't. You also have to master usul al-fiqh. You have to master the maqasid al-sharia, right? The objectives of the Islamic law. Then you have to master urf, right? Being familiar with the condition of the people and the affairs of daily life. And then you also have to master adl, right? Being fair and being pious and being just in your character and in your conduct, right? If you do not have a mastery of all 8 of these categories, then you are not qualified to be a mujtahid, right? So therefore, it is something that is not easy to achieve, right? But it's good that it's not easy to achieve, because then don't just have opinions being thrown around everywhere, right? Being thrown around everywhere. And the companion Mu'adh bin Jabal, right, was a perfect example of someone who did have an understanding of all of these disciplines. Okay. So, now let's talk a little bit about how usul al-fiqh, or how the usul fit in with other Islamic sciences. So I want us to imagine, a pyramid. At the base of the pyramid, right, is the first classification of Islamic sciences called ulum al-masadir. Right? Ulum al-masadir. These are the source sciences. These disciplines are very clear in our religion. What are the two sources that we have? Quran and Sunnah. Boom. Done. Right? This knowledge is to swim in what we call those oceans. The ocean of the Quran, the ocean of the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, to understand what is there and what's not there. What is in the hadith literature and what is not in the hadith literature. What is in the Quran and what is not in the Quran. What is emphasized, what is de-emphasized. And to have a broad exposure of the Quran and the words of the Prophet ﷺ. Right? So you often hear, if you're ever engaged in circles of ilm, they refer to the Quran and Sunnah as like the nas, right? Yeah, okay, tamam. So then, after that, you have the middle part of the pyramid, which is called ulum al-wasa'il. Ulum al-wasa'il. These are the gateway or tool sciences. These are the subclasses of disciplines that help a person understand other disciplines of study. So, again, we talked about Arabic language and its subcategories, right? Nahw and sarf and balagha. And then in this middle category, we also have the usul disciplines. Usul al-tafsir, usul al-fiqh, usul al-hadith. And that middle category helps us understand the others and understand what is a legitimate scholarly opinion and what is not. And it follows a methodology and what does not. And what builds on what has come before and what makes a new contribution. And then at the peak of the pyramid are the ulum al-maqasid, which are the objective sciences, which is what we're trying to reach in the first place. And these are the tafsir and fiqh. And, maybe behavior and character as well can be applied here. These are the applications of the sciences in the lower parts of the pyramid. And finally, wrapping around the pyramid, you want to have something which represents like a fourth and final category, is the ulum al-mutammimat, or the completing sciences. This is like the icing on the cake, right? This is what beautifies the sciences that you have studied. The examples of this is like the shama'il of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, right? It helps beautify the sciences that you have just studied. So let us ask an uncomfortable question. How do our individual journeys of learning Islam map on these categories? Right? I want you to reflect on that. I'm not going to ask anybody to answer, but just reflect on that. Many of us are exposed to Islamic sciences through short intensives, conferences, online reminders, short videos that are well-intended, right? Maybe some well-intended, poorly organized weekend schools and other similar venues. And this is not to minimize those efforts, because those are extremely value pursuits. But it's to identify that there's a real and pressing challenge of institutionalized, systematic learning of the true Islamic intellectual tradition, especially one that is relevant to the modern context, right? And so what we do is we start with short heart softeners, stories, and package well into short 5-minute bursts, and they're beautiful, quick, they grab our attention, but we don't really know what's in the Quran, right? Or we're stuck on auto repeat. We're stuck on certain chapters. We don't really know what's there. We don't know what is there and what's not there. We just heard others in the Quran talk about it, right? And so we talk about it and then we say, I think there's a hadith, I think there's a verse somewhere, right? That we talk about it kind of in that way. And many of us also don't have a broad appreciation of the Prophet ﷺ and who he really was. We think of him as like an idea, right? When in reality, our mashayikh recommended that you do a khatam of the seerah every year because you need to know who he was, right? And every time you read the seerah, you can look at it from a different lens based on what you're going through, right? If you're a student and you look at the seerah, you're going to have a very different grasp of the seerah than when you're a father and you look at the seerah. It's going to have a different perspective, a different outlook. So the usul, therefore, are not only a source of regulation for scholars, but they're also a gateway and a map for everyday Muslim to understand the fabric of Islamic thought and their worldview. Okay, so to deepen our appreciation of the usul disciplines, we need to examine, right, usul al-fiqh at an introductory level, inshallah ta'ala. So first of all, we need to talk about what are the primary sources in usul al-fiqh. Okay? What do you guys think the top primary source in usul al-fiqh is? The Quran. Easy, right? This is easy, alhamdulillah. The Quran is what contains many types of verses, right? It includes verses of devotional acts, dietary law. It has verses of social justice, family law, many other topics, right? It's an all-encompassing book. And we can see that it talks about aqidah, qul huwallahu ahad, right? It talks about, آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كل من آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله, right? Aqidah, right? The pillars of Iman. Believe in Allah, believe in His messengers, believe in His books, believe in His angels, etc. It also talks about character. وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Yeah? Your Lord has decreed that you worship none but Him and be good to your parents. Right? Talks about character, talks about ritual worship, talks about zakat, talks about hajj, talks about praying, right? Talks about Ramadan, talks about fasting. The Quran also talks about transactions, right? What's a valid marriage contract? What is a divorce? What is a dowry? What is when you're when you're giving a loan to someone? You should write down these loans and you should have witnesses, etc. Right? There are laws. Then we have the second source, which, what do you guys think that is? The Sunnah, right? Easy, alhamdulillah. Now why is the Sunnah a proof? Why is the Sunnah a proof, right? This question is crucial to understand because there are many people today that want to deny the Sunnah, right? And say that hadith literature is man-made, it's made up. But there are numerous verses in the Quran that talk about obeying the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ أَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ, right? قُلْ أَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ, right? So how are you going to follow Allah and His Messenger if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not preserve the message of the Messenger, right? So as a matter of fact, if you try to reject the hadith literature, what are you actually doing? You're rejecting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is truthful, right? And the same people that narrate or that pass down the Quran, that preserve the Quran for us today are the same people that brought down the hadith literature too. It's the same scholars. So you're either going to have to take the whole thing or reject the whole thing. It's up to you. But you can't just say, I'm a Quran only guy. Like that it doesn't make sense, right? So because a'udhu billah, when you say that, you're saying that Allah failed in His mission of preserving the deen for us. And that is blasphemy. That's blasphemy. So it's a direct command to obey the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? How do we do that? The hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam are his sayings, right? For example, how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sayings can be an authoritative role in defining law, right? For example, the permissibility about seafood. They asked about seawater, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam informed them that anything from the sea is pure, right? Anything from the sea is pure. But this is different from when you find like a dead animal on the side of the road, right? If you find a dead fish in the sea, it's still permissible to eat. But a dead animal on the road, a raccoon or a deer on the road, you're not allowed to eat that, right? So the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ tell us explicitly what is allowed and what is not allowed. There are also the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, right? How he performed Hajj, how he prayed, right? How he gave zakat, like actual actions, right? Then there are the approvals of the Prophet ﷺ, where he would, give a tacit approval. Somebody would come to him and say something, and then he would give approval, right? For example, once there was two companions. They came to the Prophet ﷺ for his advice on something that happened between them. So earlier, they had been looking for water to make wudu, and they could not find any, so they made tayammum instead. Later on, after finding water, one of the companions repeated his prayer, and the other did not. And so the Prophet ﷺ gave his approval to both by not rebuking either of them. In other words, he said, you both are correct in the action that you took, right? In the action that you took. And so the Prophet ﷺ established a legal precedent here. Right? So Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah, he mentioned that the Sunnah embodies one of three categories. The Sunnah emphasizes a Quranic demand. So for example, Allah mentions prayer and Hajj in the Quran, and the Sunnah in turn emphasizes their rewards and importance. The Sunnah, or number two, the Sunnah explains a Quranic concept. So the Quran teaches us we need to pray. Does it teach us how to pray? Right? It doesn't, right? It teaches us to pray, make ruku', make sujood. We don't know how that looks like. We don't know what that is like. So we need the Sunnah to teach us how to do that, right? Teach us how to do that. What breaks the fast, what doesn't break the fast? We're told to fast, but are we told what breaks the fast and what doesn't break the fast in the Quran? Right? No, we're not. So, that is also from the Sunnah. And number three, the Sunnah contains commands that are also not mentioned in the Quran. An example of this is the prohibition of men wearing gold and silk. This is not found in the Quran. This is from the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, right? But the Prophet ﷺ explicitly forbade it in his Sunnah. Then there are some secondary sources after the Quran and Sunnah that help form our law. There is ijma', which we talked about already extensively. Okay, so we'll just move on from that one. If you have questions, we can talk about it in the end. Then there is qiyas, right? This is probably one of the most important ones because it's where we find a lot of differences of opinion today, right? It's known as al-qiyas. And al-qiyas is defined as deduction of legal prescriptions from the Quran or Sunnah by analogic reasoning. And so what is the proof for qiyas? There actually is a proof. In the hadith of Mu'adh mentioned earlier, right, when he said Quran, Sunnah or ijtihad, the struggle to find out something, al-qiyas falls under ijtihad. Right? In another hadith, a woman came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, my mother vowed to go for Hajj, but she died before she did so. Can I perform Hajj on her behalf? Prophet Muhammad said what? Yes, perform Hajj on her behalf. Do you not think if your mother owed a debt that you would pay off that debt? So fulfill her debt to Allah. For Allah is more deserving that what is owed to him and he should be paid. Right? So put differently, the Prophet ﷺ made qiyas of the debt to Hajj. And so he deduced a ruling on Hajj. Right? Just as she would be able to pay a debt for her mother, she could also perform Hajj on her behalf. Okay? Now, there are rules and regulations that are concerning qiyas, which consist of four essential elements. The first thing is the fundamental issue itself, which is the asl. One must first identify what the fundamental issue is. I'll give an example, and the example we will use is wine or alcohol. Okay? The secondary issue is the fara', which is something that is not directly addressed in the Quran and Sunnah. But we need to determine its ruling. And this secondary issue is known as the fara', right? Which literally means what? It means branch, right? It's a branch of the original issue. So in this example, we know that drugs like heroin and cocaine did not exist in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. You will not find a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ prohibiting heroin and cocaine. You won't find it, right? If you do, that would be actually kind of wild. Probably mawdu'a, right? It's probably fabricated because those things did not exist at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So how do we come up with a ruling on this issue? How do we know if it is permissible or it is not permissible? So the ruling on the fundamental issue is in order to determine the ruling on heroin or cocaine, we need to establish the ruling on the fundamental issue. So what is the ruling on the asl? The asl is what? Wine. What's the ruling on the asl? Is it permissible to consume? No, it is haram, right? Awesome, you guys know that. Perfect. So, the Quran and the Sunnah clearly forbid khamr. Easy. Now, there's a fourth element to this, and that is something called the illah. When something is prohibited and you want to make qiyas on that prohibition, you have to ask yourself, right? Or a scholar will ask themselves, why was it prohibited? Right? What is the effective cause of the prohibition? So we can establish that the illah of prohibiting khamr is what? Intoxication. Right? Intoxication. It makes someone intoxicated. So now, based on the original ruling of wine, okay, that we have, which is the asl, now I'm looking at the fara', which is another drug, and I see that there is a commonality in the illah. The effective cause, which is the fact that heroin also changes your state of mind. It also is a mind-altering drug, and it is so therefore the ruling, qiyas-wise, is going to be that heroin and cocaine are also haram, right? Are also haram. Now, one of the beauties of qiyas is that it shows us how universal our religion is. So people may argue, right? I don't know why you would argue this, but if you wanted to argue it, that heroin can't be haram because there's no hadith that clearly says it, right? We can acknowledge that. But that is simply because this substance was not available at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. But the ultimate purpose of usul al-fiqh is to help preserve the religion and allow it to be relevant at all times, right? So when new issues arise, we can use qiyas and we can make analogies and deduce to determine rulings for new issues. And this holds true whether it's today, 10 years ago, or 10 years from now, or far into the future. Now, last and not least, why did we talk about all of this stuff today? And that is because it's important to recognize that with the usul al-fiqh and with the usuls of our deen, there's also going to come differences of opinion. There's going to come differences of opinion. And it's important also to recognize before we talk about differences of opinion, the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ also differed on issues. The scholars have recorded many differences amongst the companions. The greatest example that is quoted is the incident of Banu Qurayza. The Prophet ﷺ told them, no one amongst you should pray Asr until you reach Banu Qurayza, right? So the companions, they set out, and at the time of Asr came while they were still on the road. Some of the companions realized that if they delay their Asr and they get to Banu Qurayza, they will miss their Asr prayer. So now they're stuck. They don't know what to do. Prophet ﷺ commanded us to go to Banu Qurayza and pray Asr there, but if we go to Banu Qurayza, we're going to miss Asr. So do we pray now or do we wait? Right? Some of the companions understood the Prophet ﷺ's command to pray Asr to emphasize, right, to hasten their destination to Banu Qurayza. Right? Meaning he did not mean it literally. He meant it in a way as get to Banu Qurayza as soon as possible. And because inna salata kana al mu'minina kitaban mawquta, we're going to pray now. Another group said no. Ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasul. Right? He said it, we're going to obey it, and we're going to wait to pray Asr until we get to Banu Qurayza. Okay? When the two groups arrived and they debated, the Prophet ﷺ was informed of what happened, and he did not say that either group was incorrect. He said, you both made the best judgment, right, on what was provided to you and what you had learned from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So it's also important to recognize that there are valid differences and invalid differences of opinion. And the differences must remain within the usul of Islam. To better understand this concept, let's take the example of two physicians. They both have the same training, but they may have different approaches as to how to treat a particular disease. That doesn't necessarily mean that one is wrong or one is more correct. They just have different approaches. If one were to open a medical practice, having just read some books or watched some videos on medicine, they would be prosecuted for medical fraud, right? Only after proper training and credentials will differences in their approaches be valid. Similarly, there have to be legitimate differences of opinion in the Islamic sciences. There's no difference in fundamental beliefs. Now, a scholar, for example, will disagree that it is obligatory to believe in heaven and hell. They won't disagree on that, right? If they disagree on that, then it is equivalent to a doctor saying that the human being doesn't have a heart. You're like, okay, you're not even a doctor anymore. Like, what are you even saying? Right? It's just completely out of the ordinary. But an example of valid difference of opinion regards wiping the head in wudu. This is an example. The command to do so is based on the Quranic verse of فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهُكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. So, when you rise to perform prayer, wash your face and your forearms to the elbows and wipe over your heads and wash your feet to the ankles, right? But the verse uses the Arabic letter ba, biru'usikum, okay? Which can have two meanings. It could either mean some of the head or it can mean all of the head. And so therefore, some scholars have deemed it obligatory to wipe only parts of the head, and some scholars have deemed it obligatory to wipe the entire head, right? Imam Shafi'i, for example, or the Shafi'i madhab, it's obligatory to at least do 3 hairs, right? Or a short amount of hairs. In the Hanafi madhab, 1/4 of your head. The Maliki madhab, the entire head, right? All of them use the exact same verse to come to their conclusion. And they're all, practitioners who are scholars, who are usuliyun, right? So oftentimes we view these differences of opinion as like perplexing, right? But these differences, it gives a level of richness, of depth, and tolerance in our historic tradition, which is truly a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So to summarize that kind of discussion, it's important, of course, to remember that our yardstick in addressing benefit or harm is not the yardstick that is handed to us by secular humanism, materialism, or even like liberalism, but our benefit and harm must be assessed according to the hierarchical structure of Islam, which situates that human beings on a spiritual journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the ones who are the custodians upon the earth, right? So this is usul al-fiqh. And the thing about usul al-fiqh and differences of fiqh, anything that is within the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah should not be condemned, ever. Okay? So, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah generally is understood as the 4 madhab of fiqh, Hanafi madhab, Shafi'i madhab, Maliki madhab, and Hanbali madhab, and the 3 schools of Aqidah, the Ash'aris, the Maturidis, and the Atharis, right? If there is an opinion that is held by one of these methodologies, then it should not be condemned. It should not be condemned at all, right? And this is because in our history, there is a millennia of refining that occurred with these madhab. Has there only been 4 madhab that this Islamic tradition has seen? Just those 4? No. There's been at least a dozen. But these are the only 4 that have stood the test of time. Right? Meaning over a millennia, over 1,000 years, 1,200 years, 1,300 years of hundreds of thousands of scholars refining the madhab, refining the usul, refining the opinions of the madhab, and all of that is what we have today. So the Hanafi madhab is not on Imam Abu Hanifa's shoulders alone. He is the founder of the madhab, but there are hundreds of thousands of Hanafi scholars that have refined the school over millennia and above. And so these 4 are the ones that have stood the test of time. They've been scrutinized heavily because I'll tell you one thing, scholars of the deen, especially in fiqh and hadith, they are not nice people. They're mean, man. They will question everything. And it still made it to the other side as a valid opinion, as a valid difference of opinion. And what's also fascinating is when you go read the reasonings for all their opinions, you will be convinced of each one. So you'll sit here and you'll wonder, okay, what does this hadith mean, right? And then you'll go check it in Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar by Imam Ja'far al-Tahawi, which is a masterful text in which he takes all the narrations. So he quotes the Hanafi opinion, right? And he brings all the narrations of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that affirm the opinion of the Hanafi madhab, okay? Then he lists all the narrations that go against the Hanafi opinion. And then below that, what he does is he actually uses usul al-fiqh, right, to flip it on the opposer and say those hadith that you think are actually against the Hanafi madhab, let me show you why it's actually for the Hanafi madhab. And you read it, and after you read just one mas'ala, you're like, I'm convinced, that's it. You go read the same mas'ala in Bidayat al-Mujtahid by Ibn Rushd, a Maliki scholar, by the end of it, you'll be like, nah, I'm Maliki now, I'm good. You go read the same mas'ala in Kitab al-Umm of Imam Shafi'i, you'll be like, that's it, I'm done, I'm Shafi'i now. The same mas'ala in I don't really know many Hanbali books, forgive me, but like Ibn Qudama, anything by Ibn Qudama or Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali is probably going to be pretty good, right? You go to any of those works and you read the same mas'ala, you're also going to be convinced. Because each one, their methodology is very structured, is very principled, is very disciplined. And what you'll notice is that they're actually using the same evidence to derive to their conclusions, right? To arrive to their conclusions. So, with that being said, if you see someone who is doing something differently, praying with their hands behind their side, to their side, right? As long as there's no stone there, you don't have to worry about anything, right? If you understood that joke, alhamdulillah. If you didn't, also alhamdulillah, no worries. Or, the imam doesn't say ameen out loud, or he doesn't raise his hands when he goes into ruku'ah, right? Or etc. It's okay. It's okay. First, ask the question, is it within the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah? If it is, then alhamdulillah, no problem, right? Alhamdulillah, no problem at all. Now with that being said, you also want to be someone who is accommodating, right? So my general principle is be strict on yourself, right? Because it helps develop good habits, good principle, good consistency. But when it comes to other people, there's no reason for you to project your own tarbiyah and your own tazkiyah and your own, trying to be disciplined and consistent onto other people, right? Because technically speaking, it is not an obligation to follow one madhab. Because in order to make something an obligation, it has to, right? It has to what? It has to be proven from the Quran and Sunnah. And so, is there a hadith that says, follow Imam Abu Hanifa, he's the truth? No, there isn't, right? There isn't. So it's not required to follow a madhab. However, the reason why it's recommended is because of the consistent methodology and the consistent principle, right? The consistent principle and methodology. There's a famous example that's constantly given, the example of wudu. Let's say I make wudu at home and I'm walking to Jum'ah, right? I'm trying to follow the sunnah. So I make wudu at home, I'm walking to Jum'ah. Then all of a sudden, because we live in America and there's dogs everywhere, dog comes and runs up and jumps on me and licks my hand, on my skin. The Maliki madhab says what? No, the Maliki madhab says that it's pure, right? You should still wash it, but technically speaking, I can pray with the najas, the saliva. It's not najas. Yeah, it's not najas. So I can technically pray with it on my hand. Okay? I'm like, okay. You know what? The Maliki madhab says this, so I'm good to go. So I keep walking. Okay? Then a woman passes by me, or someone of the opposite gender passes by. There's no women here today, right? Okay. Someone of the opposite gender passes by, and brushes up against my hand or another part of my skin or my arm. The Shafi'i madhab says what? If you touch the skin of a non-mahram, what happens? Your wudu is broken. Okay? Hanafi madhab doesn't say that though. Maliki madhab doesn't say that though. Maliki madhab has the condition that it has to be with shahwa, and the Hanafi madhab says even with shahwa it doesn't break your wudu. Right? Technically speaking. Sorry? Oh, that's actually, they treat that as an exception. Yeah. The Shafi'i scholars are like, no, there's just no way to control that, right? That's a good question, right? Some of them try to, at least for the sisters, right? They just try to wear, obviously they try to be a little bit more cautious with it, but for the brothers with the ihram that we wear, it's almost inevitable. So it's, but it also, you have to keep in mind, it has to be skin to skin, right? So if you brush up against a woman accidentally in Hajj, and it was her cloth, not her skin, your wudu is still good, still intact, no problem. Anyways, so now you're walking, you're like, okay, so Maliki madhab said dogs are okay. And by the way, they never say dogs are okay. Maliki, this very big misconception, doesn't mean that you can just go buy a puppy and have it run around in your home. They still don't allow that, right? They're just saying that the saliva of the dog is not considered impure, right? Now, and the Shafi'i madhab says that, or the Hanafi madhab says that it's okay that if I accidentally touch skin to skin with a woman, then my wudu is not broken yet. And then I'm walking, and I stub my toe on a rock, for example, and I'm wearing open-toed shoes, and I start to bleed from my toe. The Hanafi madhab says that if the blood breaks the surface, meaning that, how blood kind of like bubbles up at first, and then it kind of breaks and it flows, right? That flow is what will break the wudu, okay? Shafi'i madhab doesn't say that though, right? So now, in my process of getting to the masjid, I have broken my wudu according to at least one of the madhahib at some point. So now by the time I get to the masjid, according to nobody do I have wudu, but because I decided to pick and choose and mess around with methodologies and principles, I think I have wudu. Do you understand what I'm saying? Right? So this is the danger of trying to pick and choose between madhahib. Now again, what did I say at the beginning? Technically speaking, we can't ascribe it as haram and halal, or permissible or forbidden. Or obligatory to follow madhab, or forbidden to not follow madhab. Because in order to do that, you have to have evidence from the Quran and Sunnah from that, and you're not going to find evidence from the Quran and Sunnah to make it obligatory. But that is why it's highly recommended, because you are trusting hundreds of thousands of scholars that have refined the madhab and the methodology over millennia, and they follow a principle and a methodology, right? That is accepted by even the ones that disagree with them, right? They disagree, but they accept, meaning that they believe it to be valid. They understand how people derive to that conclusion, okay? Now, the final question that is all often asked, what madhab should I follow, right? The reality is, there's no madhab that is superior to the other. The madhab that you should follow is what you have the most access to, right? What you have the most access to. Most people aren't even really going to know which madhab they follow. They're just going to follow what their local imam says and what their local sheikh says, right? If that's your life right now, perfect, keep that going, okay? You can ask your sheikh or wherever the imam is, or wherever that you follow is, you can ask them what their madhab is, but if your method is just, I'm just going to follow whoever I trust, right? Perfect, no problem at all, right? But if you know that, for example, like I'll just give you my personal experience, okay? I grew up Shafi'i, okay? My grandpa was, a sheikh at Al-Azhar, and my father, also studied the Shafi'i madhab extensively. We were taught the Shafi'i madhab as kids. We weren't taught it as the Shafi'i madhab, but we were taught the rules of the Shafi'i madhab as kids, right? And then I went to go study on my own. For the first year and a half of my studies, I remained Shafi'i. And then there came a point in my studies where I realized what? 90% of the teachers that I am taught by are Hanafi. And at this point in my studies, a year and a half later, I know more about the Hanafi madhab and the reasoning behind the rulings than I do of the Shafi'i madhab. Therefore, it makes sense to switch. Because I know more of it, I have more access to it, I have more ability to ask questions about it, I have more connections to it, I have more understanding, reasoning of it. Therefore, it makes sense to switch. It had nothing to do with me viewing one as superior to the other. It just had to do with what? What do I have the most access to? What do I have the most access to, right? And Wallahu ta'ala alam. So we'll conclude here, inshallah. Do we have any questions? Yes, in the back.
Do you think that
A little bit of both. It depends on the community, right? If the community is accustomed to a certain madhab, it is ill-advised for the imam to come and change it. Because you're going to confuse people and you're going to cause fitna. Okay? So the imam needs to be smart enough. Oh, sorry. The question is, should a community follow a particular madhab or choose from different madhab based on the community's needs, right? Now, if there is something within one particular madhab that is becoming very difficult for the community to follow, then, with shura, with the imam of the masjid or who the sheikh of the masjid is or the scholar of the masjid, there should be accommodations that are made, right? So, there also needs to be mutual understanding between the imam and the congregation of what is something that can be compromised and what cannot be compromised, right? So, I'll give you an example actually that happened here yesterday, okay? So in the Hanafi madhab, right, which is the madhab that I follow, if you're a traveler, it is obligatory to perform qasr, okay? It's not an option, it's obligatory, it's fard. So the madhab that I follow, it's considered to be fard, right? Therefore, if I lead salah, I'm going to have to pray qasr, right? Because, the madhab I follow, it's invalid if I don't do that. But when it comes to things that are sunnah, or afdal, or issues of discussion, or even within the madhab itself there is discussion, then the imam should be flexible. So the example of this is like how the khutbah is performed, how the Eid Salah is performed, right? If there is a custom or a certain way that the congregation has, that is accustomed to, then the imam should follow that way to not cause confusion and to keep the consistency and the sanctity of the congregation, right? So within the Hanafi madhab is actually the first madhab to even introduce the idea of a khutbah being done in a different language, right? Of a khutbah being done in a language that is not Arabic. The predominant opinion within the school is that the khutbah needs to be done in Arabic. So if you've ever gone to a predominantly Hanafi masjid, what will you see? The sheikh will get up and start preaching like an English lecture without no adhan or anything happens. He just gets up and starts preaching in English, right? And then he will sit down and then somebody comes and makes an adhan and he gives 2 small Arabic khutbahs and then the salah commences, right? So that English part is basically what just replaces it's called, what they call a bayan, is basically just like the spiritual aspect that people want to get from the Friday, but because the majority of the Hanafi madhab consider that the Arabic portion is the part that is obligatory, they leave that to the end and they do that kind of quickly in the last 5 minutes, right? Has anybody ever seen this before being done, right? Yeah, you've seen this being done. So this is the method of the Hanafi madhab of how to adopt a khutbah in a country that does not speak the Arabic language, okay? However, within the school, there's differences of opinion, right? So therefore, if I go to a community like here, and you do the khutbah the standard way that people are accustomed to, I'm not going to change that, right? I'm not going to change it. It does not make sense to change that. Because it's not even something of is it valid or not? It's an ikhtilaf of what is better, right? And so therefore, in that scenario, it is better to do what the community is accustomed to. Wallahu ta'ala alam. But in these cases, it's going to have to be a case-by-case scenario, right? And the biggest problems that we have as an ummah are all ikhtilafi issues of what is better. Like calculation method or moon sign, right? Masah over the socks or not masah over the socks. These are all things that are like, what is better, what is not better. And we make it like it's life or death, right? And it's like, but these are things that are actually very flexible in our fiqh, in our deen. Wallahu ta'ala. Alhamdulillah, I have, at least studied the 8 categories to some degree, but mastery is something that happens over decades, right? Over decades. So nothing yet, but inshallah. That's the goal, right? Inshallah. That would be great. Yes, Habib.
I'm trying to understand your point of view on the difference of opinion on following the madhab.
Yeah.
In other words, you said it's not obligatory to follow the madhab.
Technically, but I'd still recommend it.
And
Yeah.
my background and my understanding was it depends on the person. For the vast majority, that it's recommended because that's the way to get to something without being able to go deeper into,
Yeah.
into the knowledge. But then you mentioned you yourself follow a madhab and you make it on yourself obligatory to pray khaterah, for example, because you follow the Hanafi madhab.
Yeah.
And that's the part that I'm trying to understand. For someone who has the knowledge, has the ability to research as needed, why do they have to follow a madhab? Shouldn't they be able to say, for this issue, I studied this madhab and I'm more convinced of this. For the other issue, I have the knowledge to say, no, I'm actually more inclined to accept the Shafi'i position and have that flexibility for a learning person.
Yes. Beautiful question. Beautiful question. So the reason is because, first, the reason why I recommend is because you're following a consistent methodology and consistent principle, right? When I start to research and I start to look into the differences of opinion and I start to ask myself, why, or I'm more convinced of this opinion versus this opinion, what I've just done is created my own madhab, right? I've created my own methodology of how to derive to conclusions. You understand what I'm saying? So, because it's not like the Hanafi madhab was unaware of what the Shafi'i madhab was saying, and the Shafi'i madhab was unaware of what the Maliki madhab was saying, and they were just operating on their own. No, they interacted with each other as a madhab, right? Obviously, the imams lived at separate times. Imam Shafi'i and Imam Malik met each other, but other than that, the imams lived at separate times. But the practitioners of the madhab all interact with each other. They've debated with each other, they've discussed these issues with each other, so they're aware of each other's opinions, they're aware of each other's thoughts and their usul. But if I go on my personal self and start researching the difference of opinion and say, oh, I'm more convinced of this, I'm more convinced of this, what I've ended up doing is creating my own methodology. On what basis am I considering this one to be more convincing than the other, right? If it's just because it's just in my heart or it's just the way I feel, right? I'm not confident in my, like the brother was asking, in my mastery of the sciences to say that, because it just makes more sense to me. I trust more that there has been hundreds of thousands of scholars that have already interacted with these differences of opinion and still arrived to the same conclusion within the madhab, right? So basically, in short, if we do that, we're kind of end up creating our own methodology of thought, our own principles, and our own madhab at the end of the day. Because what does a madhab mean? What does the word madhab mean? It just means a way, a methodology, right? So we've created our own way in that regard. Now, as I said, if that is done, and it's the opinions that are chosen are within the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, it's valid. I can't say it's not valid. I will never condemn it, right? I will never say you shouldn't do this. I just recommend sticking with one because it helps build a consistent principle, right? Now, with that being said, as I mentioned, first of all, it's good to do that for yourself, but when it comes to other people, you don't want to project that onto others. And, sorry, there was something that I was about to say, but it slipped my mind. Oh, yeah. If you don't know what madhab to follow, right, or you're you're kind of stuck, you're like, I don't know which one to follow, you just follow whoever you've been trusting the whole time, right? Who's the sheikh that I usually go to? Who's my go-to? You just follow him, right? Like I said, most people, this madhab discussion is a very unique thing in America. Because you go to Egypt, you go to Syria, you go to wherever, there's a predominant madhab that attains, and people aren't even really aware of what the predominant madhab is, right? You ask a taxi driver in Egypt what madhab you follow, he'll be like, what are you talking about? He says, I just do whatever this sheikh in the corner tells me to do. It's like, perfect. Actually, that's perfect. Keep doing that, right? The reason why it is discussed here is because in all the Islamic sciences, even in Arabic, there are differences of opinion. In Nahu and Sarf, there are differences of opinion, right? Sibawayh and the Kufiyun, there are different methodologies of how to study Nahw and Sarf. The reason why the madhahib is the one that is often discussed in America is because that's the one that's physically present. Or physically apparent. Right? I saw this guy praying to his side and I had no idea what he was doing. But when you go back home, when he goes back to his country, right? Might be Algeria, Morocco, Mali, some of the West African countries, right? Mauritania. Everybody's doing that. And so they're just like, oh, okay, like it's normal for them, but because I grew up somewhere else, it didn't seem normal to me. And so when you came to America, that mix of culture and madhahib happened, and so now we have to have these discussions. But the reality is in terms of, gatherings of ilm and gatherings of scholarship, all of the sciences have different madhahib. All of them. It's just not discussed like the madhabs ones are, and now recently even a lot of aqidah stuff are discussed as well. But specifically, the madhab of fiqh is the most commonly discussed because of its physically being apparent. Wallahu ta'ala. Yes, Habib.
Just a follow-up on what Buddha has said. As you know that we live in communities here in the United States, people from different backgrounds,
Yeah.
come from different cultures. And we all know that also the madhab themselves, they evolve.
They evolve, yeah.
You cannot say that the Hanafi today is the same as the Hanafi at the time of Hanifa, or the Shafi'i today at the time of the Shafi'iyya and at the time of Shafi'i.
True, very true, yeah.
So it's very important to understand this. And I just want to ask a question. How do you deal if you identify yourself as Hanafi, let's say, just for the sake of argument, I'm not and somebody has a different opinion, okay, and he's asking you questions, and he's saying, no, I disagree with you, and start arguing, and this and that. How do you deal with a situation like that?
Well, first of all, I would stop arguing with him, right? I found that to not be beneficial. As I mentioned that, right, currently I'm an imam at a downtown Seattle masjid in a very diverse community. So what happens? Anytime I say anything on the minbar, someone thinks I'm wrong, right? Because if you have diverse culture, you're going to also have diverse opinions, right? There's two things, right? Number one, you just want to show that what you're following has basis, okay? What you're following has basis. If you can show that what you're following has basis, then alhamdulillah, right? If they still try to probe and try to argue and try to say, no, you're wrong after that, then honestly just leave them alone. Like there hasn't been proper tarbiyah that has been done. There hasn't been proper discussion of adab al-ikhtilaf that has been done with that individual to understand that there is a different scope and there is a different difference of opinion, right? I'll tell you an interesting story. And this changed my perspective on difference of opinion completely. So I hope it'll change your guys' perspective too. One of my teachers, okay, he's an academic, right? So he's both very traditional, but he also loves a lot of academic stuff too. So he does interact very frequently with Western academics of Islam, right? And he always rants about them and how and all that kind of stuff, and it's funny. But he does interact with them. But one day, he wanted to do kind of like an interesting experiment. So here are these non-Muslims who have a lot of expertise in Islamic literature, specifically hadith literature, and the isnad system and things like that, right? So he decided, let me do an experiment with them. He grabbed 5 of them, and he gave them a book, right, that was written, called the Authentic Prayer of the Prophet, right, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is a book where Sheikh Nasiruddin al-Albani, rahimahullah, has compiled all the authentic narrations of how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prayed. And he gave that to each of these 5 non-Muslim Orientalists who are also so-called experts, right, on Islam, right? And then he told them, take this, 1 month from now, I want you to come and show me how to pray. What happened? All 5 of them prayed differently. Same source, same text, but all 5 of them understood it differently, and they all prayed differently, right? Or the actions of prayer were different. And so now he's like, interesting, right? And once I heard that, once I realized that, everything all made sense to me completely. That people, it's very clear that people can have the same source and arrive to a different conclusion, right? The example that I gave earlier today, when I say the word surf, that's it. I could be talking about surfing the web, I could be talking about surfing in the ocean, right? And based on the context, it may have a different interpretation, right? So it's the same evidence at the end of the day, it's the same word, it's the same verses, it's the same hadith. There's no like a different Quran that the Hanafis are operating with. There's not like a different hadith that the Shafi'is are operating with, the hadith literature. It's the same stuff, right? But they still arrive to different conclusions. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. So, yeah, I mean, in short, I try not to debate with people like that. I just show that that there is basis for the claim that I have made, and if you can't accept that, then that's a personal problem, Habibi. You're gonna have to figure that one out, right? Wallahu ta'ala a'lam.
I was wondering if the intent of the question was different. We will then ask the question. Well, no, I'll ask the question. Doesn't matter. I can just speak. I thought I understood the question differently. If somebody comes to ask for an opinion, I read it as, would you explain the different opinions and then state your inclination, perhaps?
Was that the question?
That's how I understood it. But you want to...
Like if somebody came. Yeah. So if somebody, okay, this is actually a good question, right? If somebody comes and asks me, so the question is, if somebody comes and asks me for an opinion, would I present the difference of opinion and kind of let them choose, right? So alhamdulillah, one of the reasons, one of the things that traditional madrasas will do is they'll take you to like a beginner and then intermediate level of like a particular madhab, whatever madhab that they follow, so that you have a good scope and understanding and foundation in one area. And then afterwards, in the later years, usually after the last 2 or 3 years of a madrasa, you start to dabble in the comparative fiqh and comparative study, so that you have a foundation, and then you start to look at the scope of the difference of opinion, so that you're not necessarily confused about your methodology or the methodology that your teachers follow or that your madrasa follows, but then at the same time, you're also to accommodate other people, right? So usually when people come to me and ask me for a question, depending on the mas'ala, because there are a lot, honestly, like, there are more masail that the madhahib agree on than they don't agree on, right? The reason why, we talk about the madhahib is because what is disagreed on is what is discussed. What is agreed on isn't really discussed, right? But they actually agree on a lot more than people think. So if it's something that is agreed on, then no problem. I just give them the general answer, no problem, right? I also try to give them an answer that encompasses all 4, right? That encompasses all 4. So, for example, if somebody asks me how to make wudu, if you follow wudu from the sunnah way, right, then you encompassed all the madhahib. So there's no reason to say, in the Hanafi madhab it says this is fard, this is sunnah, this is wajib, this is that. There's no point in doing all that if you just say, this is how you make wudu, right? The sunnah way of the Prophet ﷺ, it already encompasses all the madhahib already right there, right? Now, if it is something that actually has legitimate difference of opinion, then I ask the person, is there a particular methodology that you usually follow? Okay? Is there a particular madhab that you usually follow? If they say, yes, I usually follow this madhab, I'll say, to my understanding, if I know the answer, to my understanding, this would be the ruling in this case, right? And if I don't, then I say, okay, I don't know that particular madhab ruling on this mas'ala, I'll have to look it up and come back to you, right? And then I'll give them that, right? If they ask me, what would you do, if as a follow-up, they say, what would you do in this scenario? Then I would tell them exactly what I would do. And if they want to follow that, they can follow that. Wallahu ta'ala. Books are. Yeah. I don't remember what that was called though. Do you remember what the title of it was? Ijma' ibn Muddan? That's the one I'm familiar with too. That's the only one I'm familiar with, to be honest, right? Ijma' ibn Muddan. But there might, yeah, I'll have to look more into that, inshallah. Good question. Jazakallah khair. Okay. Yeah. Anybody has any other questions? You can come up, inshallah. Sorry, we're a little bit longer than expected.
Jazakumullah khair all for coming. Hopefully it's going to be the session was very informative. Jazakumullah khair, Sheikh Akram, very, very informative, detailed, a lot of knowledge. I think the topic we chose specifically, it's a critical topic. It's very important for diverse communities like ours to know that there is sa'ah in our religion within the Sunnah and Jama'ah banks. It's very, very important. And of course, the Shaykh Jazakallah khair pointed that knowledge is very important, that when we don't know, we can come to dispute, but we don't start knowing is very important. One book I can recommend about the same topic is called Adab al-Ikhtilaf fil Islam, Dr. Tahir Jabir Alwani. I think it's Arabic, I'm not sure if it's translated. Do you know if it's translated in English? Not yet. Hopefully it's translated in English. If you can send the source in English. It's very, very good about this topic, inshallah. But again, knowledge is the key, and hopefully I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to teach us all. For youth, please come at Dhuhr. For older youth, would like to thank Sheikh. He's, 11 plus until So Sheikh, inshallah, there's no scheduled events for today for after the youth, but the Sheikh is with us tonight, inshallah, until tomorrow, right?
I'll try to go to the Europeans fundraiser.
Okay, khair, inshallah. But tonight at 10, maybe Fajr also with us tomorrow. So again, casual discussions are welcome, inshallah. Jazakumullah kull khair, and may Allah reward you all for coming. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.